event. Yeah, round of applause for you. Thank you so much for being here on behalf of Brandt, his entire campaign. Thank you for being in these seats, for your support, for your encouragement, for the belief that democracy can and should exist in as many spaces as possible, including this country. My experience with Jeff Kinney as an author goes back to when I was a junior high middle school math teacher. And if you're wondering why a middle school math teacher is familiar with Jeff Kinney's work, first of all, it's amazing. And I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math, had a homeroom where we would read in the morning. And I had several students come into my 6th grade classroom that were 3 to 4 grade levels behind in their reading ability. And Diary of a Wimpy Kid was our vehicle into learning to read together. And I miss the conversations that I got to have with my students, and I think of Christian in particular. Christian came into my 6th grade classroom and was at about a 3rd grade reading level and struggled and was very hesitant to raise his hand to read our word problems out loud. By the time he was in 8th grade, not only was he reading those word problems out loud to the class, he qualified and got credit for high school algebra by the time he finished 8th grade. And I firmly believe it was Jeff Kinney's work that helped him get to that place. I love that Jeff Kinney gets to be here as a children's book author, as a political activist, as a bookstore owner. So if you're ever in Plainville, Massachusetts, please visit Unlikely Story. That's Jeff's, on the first name basis, that's Jeff's bookstore. And he and Brandt are friends. Brandt is also a teacher. And as you know, he's about bringing people together. He's about this space right here. When you walked in, you saw games to engage families. You saw volunteers connecting with you, having conversations with you, and encouraging you to have conversations with each other. I think that's very much Brandt's campaign is about community connection. It's about believing in something bigger than corporate backing. Because for too long, political parties, plural, have believed in money being the answer. And we in this room know that there's something better that's possible. And I believe that's why we're in these seats, not just to hear a conversation between two friends, but also because we believe in something better than what we've seen in the past. So, without further ado, no, come on. Before they start, I'm going to come down. If you wrote questions on an index card, please make sure you've given it to a volunteer, because at the conclusion of their conversation, I'm going to be asking your questions. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, So we blew our big entrance.
We had one chance.
That's really a bad start. I wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me here, Brandt, and thank you to everyone who showed up tonight. I really appreciate it. It's really cool for me to be from Massachusetts to come down here and to see a crowd of people. We appreciate you. This is a really cool moment for both of us.
And what I usually do is ask all of you guys to give yourselves a round of applause because you guys are in this together. So thank you so much.
So I'm not just like on my phone, Brandt. I want to let you know this is where my questions are. But I'm going to go back a few years in time. So I'm in Massachusetts. I'm on my couch. I'm scrolling through then Twitter, I guess, and I find these videos of this very intense-looking guy speaking directly to camera, and he really is excited about participatory democracy. Right? And there was something about Brandt that just drew me in. So I watched a lot of his videos. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what was happening in that day's news, put into an historical context because Brandt is a history teacher. I learned a lot. And so I reached out to Brandt. I don't often do this kind of a thing, but I reached out to Brandt and I said, hey, I'd like to come meet you. And I said, I'm a children's author. I write this series called Diary of a Wimpy Kid. So I just want to start off, Brandt, by saying, how many of my books have you read when you got that note from me?
Okay, guys, first of all, Jeff told me ahead of time that he was not going to share any of the questions with me, but 6 minutes ago, backstage, he told me he was going to share one, this one. And I started laughing because there was this time when I picked up one of the books, and I started reading it, and then I put it down, and the next day I picked it back up, and then like 4 months later it was still sitting there, and so the answer is I actually have not read any of your books.
So zero.
Zero.
Cold zero.
I want to make something clear. Jeff Sellers, where are you? Guys, there are some people in this room that watch PBS public television for fun. Raise your hand if you're one of those people. Okay, so we have a lot in common.
That's okay, that's okay. It's actually been really nice because we got to become friends outside of the context of what I do and outside the context of what you did. And we started to get to know each other because we both care about the same thing, which is the state of our democracy. But I'm really curious to know what made you decide to pick up the phone the first time and record yourself and talk about the news of the day?
All right, guys. Now, first of all, raise your hand if you're under 20 years old. So, guys, I'm going to go back to when you were, like, say, 15. 2020 was one of those years, right? There are certain years in American history, 1865, 1919, 1968. There are certain years that are going to be those years. 2020 was one of those years, right? The pandemic had begun. With the presidential race underway with candidate Biden and Trump, there was a big debate going on because George Floyd, of course, millions of people watched him die on video, and that summer, where millions of us wanted and demanded more attention to systemic racism or learning more about our nation's history, there was also a debate about race and policing. So I decided, that's why I told you about PBS, I decided to make a video about what candidate Biden should say about race and policing. So I made a 1 minute and 6 second video, and I posted it to Facebook, and somebody said, hey, you should share that. I said, I just shared it on Facebook. And he goes, what about TikTok? And I think I had a nervous reaction because, guys, at that time, TikTok was the bane of my existence because my kids were always on TikTok in the classroom. But I uploaded the video. Next day, 120,000 views. And in my classroom the next day, I was a media rock star. So that's how it all began.
That's hilarious. So, believe it or not, yesterday I sat down to start writing my 21st book on the airplane here. So I wrote the first pages, and I wrote another 30 yesterday, and then I wrote another 30 today. So the first 60 pages of my 21st book, which is called Fight or Flight, were written here, right, on this journey here. And it takes me a long time to write. Like, I always look at your videos and I think, that's kind of perfect copy. I would call it perfect copy, right? Which means that it's like really good, tight writing. When you sit down in your car to record one of those videos, how long does it take you to actually script it first?
So guys, first of all, I was the last person in America to get a cell phone. I didn't get a cell phone until 2017. Then I discovered this feature on my Apple phone called Notes. So what I started to do is, when I get an idea for a video, I'll script out a few big ideas, and then honestly, it might take me 6 or 7 times to just kind of sit there. I don't have any notes when I do the video. But what I really enjoy is being able to help people understand, especially you were talking about the context of so many things that are happening now. And I don't mean this with any disrespect to my fellow citizens, but guys, nod with me if you agree. There are millions of our fellow citizens in America who are grossly undereducated. And 2020 bore that out for me. So what happened was the day after I made that video, I decided to make another. And then for the next 4.5 years, I made a video every single day.
Yeah, and you keep showing up, which is really impressive.
Yeah, algorithm.
Right. But sometimes you're sitting there at like 5:45 in the morning or something like that, recording a video, right? Yeah. So tell me, is there a single video that you recorded that was like the most impactful or stood out or got the most likes or something like that?
So, guys, I taught for 26 years at Dunedin High School, and Jeff Sellers, Barbara Chair, and Carol Robinson, who taught with me there for all those years. But after my wife retired from Benny and I got a little bit lonely, and for the last 2 years I've been at a school in Clearwater. It's a public school, but my school, every single student was either kicked out of or failed out of one or more schools. And I'm right where I belong. Most of my students have been through serious trauma, poverty, group homes. I have to bring fierce love every single day to my kids, and I get 20 hugs a day. I'm right where I belong. But doing that and running for Congress is something unlike I've ever experienced. But the school where I teach, guys, the school where I teach used to be the campus of the old, quote, Negro North County. It was the Negro North County High School. Gibbs High School was the South County. I say that because that neighborhood was the neighborhood that was a historically black neighborhood. And there was a story done on 60 Minutes about what happened after segregation and when all this valuable property was desired by people, but it was where cemeteries were. So cemeteries in Clearwater were moved essentially to build property on top, except they didn't move the graves. And so I made a video. If you're driving in Clearwater on Missouri every day, heading south, you'll drive right over the remains of human beings who their bodies were never moved because of the desire. And I think for me, it's kind of fitting because I got my master's degree in African American history, and I'm never far removed from the awareness of that history.
So I feel like you can understand somebody very well if you know what kind of books they read. So take us back to Greg Heffley's age. Greg Heffley is my character in my series called Diary of a Wimpy Kid.
I practiced it a few times.
I'll educate him on stage right now. So he's a middle school kid. If I were to look at Brandt Robinson's bookshelf at that age, 11, 12 years old, what kind of books would I find there?
Well, my mom is right back there waving, and my stepdad Gary. So, I was raised by a single mom. How many people have ever heard of Neighborly Senior Services here in Pinellas County? It's the agency, it's the largest agency that provides services to the elderly. And so, being raised by a single mom, me and my brother, we were taught to value the greater good. And we were taught to care for other human beings. So, there were books I read like Charlotte's Web. I read a book called The K that had to do with racial injustice back when I was 11. So because my mom raised me and my brother to care what was happening and always had all kinds of picture books on the table, we had encyclopedias. I grew up following the news, and I grew up knowing what was happening, and I grew up loving history. So for me, unfortunately, I often joke with people. I say about fiction, I say I missed that unit in high school. I love nonfiction, so I grew up reading a lot of history.
And you've told me before that James Baldwin is a great hero of yours, right? What's the book of his that if I were to start off reading James Baldwin, which book would I read, and why is that book important?
So guys, how many people know, raise your hand if you know that we are in the 250th anniversary this year of the American Revolution? And how many people know that when America became a nation, we still continue the practice of racial slavery? And here's where, if you raise your hand, you're going to come up here and get a props. How many people know that in 1790, the very first ever citizenship law was passed? Citizenship was originally defined as only being available to, quote, free white persons. So how do we as Americans reconcile with that? Because we've lived through, Jeff, and you've been here with me, and I value so much because, Moms for Liberty targeted me in my classroom, African American history. And I say that because we have all been raised to see America in a certain way. And I'm never going to tell you that's right or wrong. But what I'm going to tell you is that what James Baldwin wanted us to do was to understand that there's a lot of mythology behind the American experiment. And the truth of it is very much rooted in race. And it's rooted in racism and racial injustice. And so James Baldwin wrote a book called The Fire Next Time. And that book was published in 1963. And I know some of you will nod when you remember that 1963 was the high point of the Civil Rights Movement, Birmingham campaign. I Have a Dream. 4 little girls murdered in the Church of Birmingham. What James Baldwin was trying to do was to help us understand that there's the mythology of America and then there's the reality of America. He wanted us to understand what would happen if Americans like us, black, white, or other, understood the reality. Because if we did, and here's where it gets really important and emotional for me, he said, we can truly make this country what it must become. We can make this country what it must become. But he also said something else that you've heard me talk about. He said, it can't be done without a commitment to joy and love. Guys, for those of you who met me before, raise your hand if I talked to you before the event tonight. Oh my God. I think what you experienced in me was just an incredible amount of love and joy. I've never felt so much joy and love, but I say that because if we abandon our commitment to joy and love, then there's no reason for us doing any of the things that we've been doing. Carol and I have been part of a group called Invisible North of Dallas for 9 years, and we've met each other's living rooms. For 5 years, we've known more than 10 people in a meeting. But it's because we understood that at the heart of everything, and this is what James Baldwin implores us to do, is never abandon your commitment to joy and love, but also to doing so to make this country what it must become. And I think that's really just an incredible goal, because I think a lot of people out there understand. And again, I don't want to presuppose your understanding of history, but our campaign is basically saying that we believe this election is about the soul of this country. And if you believe that, then why would you compromise on the things that matter?
So, I'm an introvert, and a lot of people think I'm an extrovert because I get out on stage, I do my thing, or I meet a lot of fans. But actually, I've come to recognize that interacting with other people actually drains my battery. Like, even if I enjoy the experience, it really drains my battery. And so you're the opposite of me, right? But I do wonder, how do you get the energy? I think something that will surprise a lot of people is that you're a full-time teacher in a very difficult, challenging situation in school. It takes a lot of your energy. Where do you get the energy to do both?
I'm not an introvert. Right, some of you, please say duh. But, you know, when you're teaching and running for Congress at the same time, one of the reasons, and I don't think I've even really shared this with Carol Robinson, you know you're the love of my life. You're my partner in all things, right? Guys, when I decided to run, I didn't one day wake up and say, man, I'm at this school where every single kid's kicked out. What else can I do? Can I run for Congress? I would have never done that. People in my individual group came to me, and when I asked Carol finally, I said, you know, people keep asking me, we've got to make a decision. And all the things she could have said, she said, I can't not share you with the world. That's how my wife told me we're running for Congress, and that was 7 months ago. So I say that because, I say that because I've learned a great deal about joy and love in myself. And what I have to say is that there have been incredible moments in the last 6 or 7 months where I just didn't think I could do this. There's an app on my phone where if the kids being too disruptive in our class, because my kids have been through serious trauma, I just type a message and say so-and-so needs to be removed. But I'm like water in my classroom for 6 classes a day. I never know what's exactly going to happen, but I have to be there for my kids all the time. So the answer to your question, Jeff, is that what I have found is that in those moments, I have to take heart in the people who love me the most. And I have to value that love and joy, and then I have to be able to, like, the next day, if I got enough rest, and I'm not doing that, and sometimes I'm not, but I have to remember the commitment to joy and love that James Baldwin has important to do. And I have to tell you that here we are 7 months later. There were 8 Democrats when we began, and there are only 2 candidates left, and we're the grassroots campaign. And since Jeff was following me on social media back in the day when there was something called Twitter, you know, even the people on Twitter who would start arguing with me at first, but then later, you know, we developed respect, even they would tell you that I don't like labels. But if there's something called the establishment, then my opponent is the establishment candidate. And I have to say, we're feeling really good about being in this position because we keep hearing people say that we're tired of the establishment, we're tired of corruption, we want to make sure that we can have people like us, genuine, real people, plumbers and firefighters and teachers running for office that actually talk to us about the things that matter. And again, with no disrespect to Anna Luna, I hope that I'm facing her in November, but she hasn't even done a single town hall meeting in her 2 years of service. In my Indivisible group, 1 year ago this month, we held a town hall here in the district for her, but she didn't come. So we called it the empty chair town hall. We had a nice likeness of her, but what happened was 400 citizens came to that church in Pinellas Park. And what we realized that day is is that those citizens weren't violent, nasty, and angry. They were citizens that were serious, they had serious needs and concerns. And what we realize is that now that I'm running for Congress, our commitment is to hold a town hall meeting every single month in the district. We have to start getting people engaged with that.
So as a writer, so I work in movies, and how many of my would-be kid movies have you seen, by the way?
How many of you?
I'm just thinking, you know. Okay. Well, so sometimes you have to do what's called an elevator pitch, right? That means you get onto an elevator with an executive, and you have to tell them the idea for your movie, just like that. Right? Maybe 3 floors, you have to tell the idea. So what's the elevator pitch for your campaign?
The elevator pitch is the things that matter. It's weird because Carol and I, in our individual group, like a year and a half ago, we were asked to go to dinner because the people that knew us in our group, there was a young couple that was getting involved in our individual group, and they asked us to sit down and have dinner. And we were just having dinner, and we were talking about politics, and then the subject of the Democratic Party came up. Just checking your reaction. The subject of the Democratic Party, and all the frustrations and challenges that the Democratic Party's have, and the messaging and everything else. And I don't know how we stumbled on it, but somehow that expression came to my mind about, why aren't we talking about the things that matter? And I think a lot of you guys raise your hand if you've wondered in the last few years why more politicians aren't talking about the things that matter. And I think a lot of Americans are feeling that. So when I came up with that expression, Carol and I often shared that over the last year and a half, not knowing that I'd be running for Congress. But now it seems appropriate because even my Republican friends will tell me that the vast majority of Republicans, because they pledged their undivided loyalty to Trump from the beginning, for a year and a half, they haven't been talking about any other things that matter.
Well, something I think you could boil it down further to the question of affordability, right? Which is matters to everybody. And I'm wondering if, what can a congressperson do about affordability, about the cost of housing here where you live?
Well, guys, I think for a lot of people, one of the concerns is that just the word affordability, for some, might be cliched already. Like, there's people that when they hear the word, they might already think, oh, there's that word again. You have to be able to talk about affordability in real terms. You have to talk about the cost of living, right? And it's just unacceptable that Americans are struggling in a nation like ours, the richest nation in the world. It's unacceptable that people struggle to provide health care or child care for their families. So for us, what we're talking about with affordability is, first and foremost, let's talk about the broad comprehensive reforms that we know are going to save people money. We believe in universal child care. We think that 90% of the parents of my students are single moms who are living on the edge. And if one of them had the opportunity to go to community college and get her nursing degree, imagine what that would mean for her family. She'd be there for her child. Her kid would come to school more often. They wouldn't miss school. They'd be well rested. They'd be more well fed. And then that woman would be putting money into our economy. What if that were true for every single person in our country who needed child care? We would be in a golden age economically like we've never seen before if we're willing to take that risk. We feel the same way about Medicare for all, universal. But I also want to point out that there are other things that we will be talking about. Like, we believe in the $20 an hour minimum wage because the minimum wage hasn't been raised since 2009. And I think a lot of us, and some of you will nod, like, how long have we been hearing about people talking about the $15 minimum wage? Like, for 15 years. So we're talking about more practical measures that can happen immediately. And I think the last part of that is the Trump administration has worked actively to undermine federal enforcement through agencies we have that are designed to enforce and to defend the rights of workers, right? The EEOC, which the Trump administration is now using to investigate DEI, or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is supposed to be on the front lines of defending consumers, that's been gutted and undermined by the Trump administration. So there are big things we can do, but there are small practical reforms that we also need to be on. I do want to say one more thing about Jeff, can I? Guys, raise your hand if you've ever heard somebody lately being suspicious of the government or being suspicious of our institutions. Because what's happened over the last 10 years is there's been an active attempt on the part of some people in our country to mislead and undermine people's knowledge and trust and faith in government. So I say that because anyone running for office has to to be prepared to not only talk about the issues over here, but talk to people about how we can get them more engaged. That's why our idea for a monthly town hall meeting, that's why our idea for every little municipality in the district to have what we call a citizens advisory council that will meet with the town council once a month and get more people involved and engaged. And if we can do that, we can start to restore some trust that people have in our government as well.
I've always been curious about the lifestyle of a person running for Congress. Like, you sometimes write to me and you say, hey, I'm out canvassing right now. You know, canvassing is sort of a new word for me. You know, I don't know much about that lifestyle. What's it like when you knock on somebody's door? Has anything funny happened? Anything unexpected?
Well, funny you should ask. Earlier today, I was canvassing for 2 hours. I knocked on 34 doors. And what happens is sometimes you meet the most incredible people. Today, I sent a picture to my campaign staff because I was talking to this woman who knew me. And then I guess her son was in his bedroom and he came running up with one of my stickers. And guys, by the way, I have bumper stickers. This has been a lot, guys. I have merch. Okay? This is a lot. Something he ran up with a sticker. And so I have the most incredible validation. But I think one of my favorites is when I was giving my usual, like I'll say, I'm Brandt Robinson, I just finished my 29th year teaching history in the district, and this woman was like, okay. And then I said, and I'm running for Congress. And she smiled and she shook my hand. She got more excited about the Congress part, the teaching part. And I thought, that woman's way cool. So I meet some really incredible people, guys. It's really incredible every time I do this.
And tell me about, when you talk about your merch, you've got a stick man in your logo. I know a thing or two about stick man. Tell me about that stick man, and why didn't you ask me to draw it?
I do want to say that when I did sit down that first time to try and read your book, like I was very encouraged when I saw your stick drawings. Like I thought, okay, like I can relate. But then I put the book down. But guys, raise your hand if you've ever heard of a film called The Shawshank Redemption. Thank goodness they've seen the movie. So if you remember the film, you know, the film was essentially about injustice, right? The character of the film, the kids who murdered his wife, he didn't do it, but while he was in jail, he did all these incredible things for other inmates, teaching them to read. Like he was a person of immense integrity, all the while, you know, secretly breaking out of jail. But you remember when he finally broke out? And he had to crawl through the sewer system, and then he came out the other side, and it was that high camera angle looking down on him. It was a driving rainstorm, and he stood like this. I think when I saw that, I think everything that my mom has taught me, my brother, and the sense of fairness that we carry around and always have carried around, and my knowledge about African American history, I think what struck me about that film was it was just a beautiful testament. Like, how do you continue to live every day knowing there's injustice in the world? But it, like, you know, you heard me talk about joy and love. Like, it just can't take you out of your focus on the things that matter to you. So what happened? I started signing my name, and at the end of my name, I would draw a little stick figure. And then when I started getting involved in teaching, when my kids got an A on a test, I would circle the A and get a little stick figure. So I just called it celebration person. So it's just a big part of my life. All my students know celebration person. And I can draw it. It's a stick person. I can do that.
So, I haven't seen Shawshank Redemption. I was going to watch it tonight, but thanks for spoiling it.
I haven't read any of your books. That's okay.
The first time I ever went on television, I felt really, I felt sick. I was so nervous. And I remember when that green light came on, and I realized that I was, beaming into people's living rooms. And I thought, there's got to be somebody out there for whom, when the green light comes on, they get excited. They're like, okay, this is my time. I've said to my friends and my wife, I've said, Brandt, I think if you put them on Fox News tonight or CNN or MS Now and just talk about any topic, he'd just take off and go. Where does that come from? Like, where do you get that confidence from?
Well, I have to say it started with my mom. Mom, don't shake your head. It started with you because, whether it's driving to grandma's in Central Florida or just, taking a trip, it was always me and my brother and my mom because she was a single mom. So when we're talking in the car, sometimes we're also talking about, Ronald Reagan's tax policy in the 1980s. I was still in high school, but so being engaged and being able to have this kind of conversation really started with my mom. But I think it's also just because if you're a teacher, you know, one of the things that you always want to ignite in students is just a love of learning. But part of that means you have to go to school every day and model that excitement. And